So my project was OBD2 Cloud. So if you're not familiar with OBD2, it's pretty much standard in every car sold from 1996 and up. So if you've ever taken your car in for emissions or you've had a trouble code checked on it, you're probably familiar with the OBD2 port. So this is just a real quick demo of my product in action. So this hardware I built with my mentor. So what you do is you connect it up to your OBD2 port, it then pulls the ECU and finds all the parameters that your ECU supports, and it uploads them to Firebase. From there, I built a React app with a couple of different components, which then pulls that data. So you can see here, this is actually live data streaming from my car while driving to the website. All this is done wirelessly, so it's accessible from anywhere that you have an internet connection. So the why. My friend's involved in a racing series called 24 Hours of Lemons. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a parody of 24 Hours of Le Mans. The cars can cost no more than $500. It's a real cheap way to get on racing if you're interested, and basically the team with the most laps wins. So here's the spoiler. $500 cars break down a lot. A lot of this is due to early signs going unnoticed. You have a lot of new drivers, and they're not paying attention to what the car's telling them. So you might have a car overheating, a car running lean, so on and so forth. And although cars are cheap, $500 cars, they're not cheap to rebuild. So this is my overcomplicated solution to this problem. A cloud-based automotive monitoring system. Keeping with the theme of the 24 hours race of lemons, I need to build it cheap, make it reliable, and build it idiot-proof. So basically plug and play. I covered the OBD2 port. Basically though, the important part is it has 200 standardized parameter IDs. So really quick, what this means is if I pull the ECU with the data, I send to 12, it sends me back the engine RPM. The coolant temp, I send to 5, I get it. I send to 13, I get vehicle speed. So this is standardized for all manufacturers from 1996 and up. So pretty straightforward. I'm gonna take you really quick how we get the data from the port up into your browser. So the beginning of this starts with a really cheap OBD2 reader from Amazon. They're 15 bucks. They're based on a chipset called the EML327. You don't need to know, that's too technical, should have left it out. But what this does, it opens up a serial port with your car's OBD2 port, and you can just pull it with those PIDs, so sending those numbers and getting the data back. This is a conversion if you're doing manually over the serial port. It's garbage, that's why we're using Python. I had an awesome animation of this Pi splaying on the car, but basically, we're applying a Raspberry Pi to our car's OBD2 port. So Raspberry Pi Zero, if you're not familiar, it's cheaper than a drink at Starbucks at $5. Smaller than a credit card, has more computing power than your toaster oven, and runs Python. So that's why we went that way. This was my first crack at, it's a mess. So this was hardware version 1.0, very ugly. Basically, every time I drove, this is how I felt, as it was getting tangled around my feet because it was plugged into my OBD2 port. Oops. This is version 2.0. Basically, what I did was I slimmed down my power supply, hardwired my data connections, busted out the 3D printer, the laser cutter, so on and so forth, and we got this much leaner, sexier version. The main portion for Python that I used was the Python OBD library. This really cut down on the amount of work I had to do. I didn't have to manually pull the ECU every time I wanted to get the data back. This handled all the communication for me. So you probably remember this from earlier. We're able to replace this with this simple function. So I was able to put in a keyword of RPM, and it would give me the data back. I could do that for all 200 PIDs. So as long as the ECU supported it, I could get the data back for that PID. The data connection right now is just taken care of through the hotspot on my phone. It's not ideal, but it works, it's cheap. It's in the spirit of 24 Hours of Lemons. For my database, I use Firebase. It has a really simple API. It's the first time I've ever used any kind of database online. It has awesome tutorials if you're interested. And also has features I plan on integrating down the road, like user authentication, file hosting, and so forth. The tools, so finally I built my app in React. Gearheads, so the way it kind of explained to me is React is like my toolbox, and all my components are basically like my tools in that toolbox. So I was able to build my components and then use them throughout my website. So on the demo page here, we have 3 different components. And all I have to do is pass in the different parameters for each of those, and it generates that gauge for me. So out of 3 components, I was able to generate a whole page full of demo data. I'd like to say huge thanks to my mentor, Cameron Murphy, who met with me pretty much every weekend and sometimes weeknights. ChiPy for putting this on. I remember when I first applied to this, I was like, there's no way I'm getting in. And somehow I made it, I don't know how. And Peak 6 for hosting this event tonight. Thank you.